She tore the phone from my hands, smashed it against the floor, and stared at me like I deserved it. The next morning, all she found was an empty room. I had disappeared without saying goodbye. Welcome to our channel, the place where unspoken pain meets unapologetic truth. If you've ever been pushed past your limit by someone you love too much, this one's for you. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Today's story is about a father who gave his all, until the one person he protected shattered more than just his phone. What followed wasn't a fight, but a silence that changed everything. Now, let's begin. There's a sound your heart makes when it breaks. It's not loud like in the movies, no dramatic music, no shattering glass. It's quiet, internal, a crack that starts in your chest and silently spreads through your soul. I heard that sound the moment my daughter ripped the phone from my hands and slammed it onto the floor. The screen didn't just crack, it collapsed. Spider-webbed into pieces, like the last strands of patience I had left. But I didn't yell. I didn't move. I just looked at her, and for a long second, I saw someone I didn't recognize anymore. She didn't flinch. No apology, no regret. Just fire in her eyes, and a voice that spit more venom than pain. "I told you to mind your own business," she snapped, breathing hard like she'd just lifted the weight of the world, and then dropped it squarely on my chest. My hand was still frozen in midair, the ghost of the phone's warmth fading from my palm. I slowly lowered it, not because I accepted her words, but because I was afraid of what might come out of my mouth if I spoke. It wasn't the first time we'd fought. It wasn't even the worst. But something about that moment, the suddenness of her rage, the way she destroyed something just to make a point, stayed with me. I wanted to ask her what had happened to us. When did love turn to blame? When did bedtime stories become slammed doors? I had raised her alone since the divorce, traded in my dreams to become the stability she could lean on. I had no savings, no social life, no real plan, just her. But I guess she didn't see that anymore. Maybe she never did. She walked away like nothing happened, leaving the pieces of the phone, of me, scattered across the tiles. The quiet that followed was so loud, I thought my ears were ringing. I bent down slowly, picking up the busted screen, the chipped case, the tiny SIM card that had popped out like it was trying to escape too. Funny how small things can carry your whole life. Contacts, photos, texts you never deleted because they reminded you of who you once were. That phone held every message her mother ever sent me, every picture from her birthdays, every memory I didn't trust myself to remember on my own. I sat back down and stared at the wall for what must have been an hour. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there numb. A voice in my head kept asking, "What are you still doing here?" But another part of me, the father part, answered, "Because she needs you." It was a war I'd been fighting for years, between staying for her and leaving for me. I thought I could outlast the pain. I thought I could fix everything with time. But sometimes, time doesn't heal. Sometimes, it just makes the silence between two people louder. That night, I cooked dinner like I always did. I set the table like nothing had happened. I even texted her from my tablet, telling her the food was ready, half hoping she'd come out with a sorry in her eyes. She never did. I ate alone. Again. The kitchen light buzzed above me, the only sound in the room besides my chewing and the clink of silverware on ceramic. I stared at her empty chair and imagined her there, laughing, asking for more mashed potatoes like when she was 9. But the ghost of who she used to be never answered. When I went to bed, I lay there staring at the ceiling, one arm draped over my eyes. I thought about calling her mom. We hadn't spoken since the court finalized everything. She left for California with a new man and a new start. I stayed behind with the girl who once used to run to me every time she had a nightmare. But now I was the nightmare. The unwanted noise. The inconvenience she couldn't block. That thought kept me awake longer than I care to admit. At some point, exhaustion took over. I drifted into a restless sleep, not knowing that it would be my last night under that roof. I didn't make the decision in a single moment. It was a slow build, 1,000 small wounds that finally reached the bone. But that shattered phone? That was the final cut. It was a symbol of how easily she could destroy me without blinking. Not out of malice, maybe, but out of disregard. And disregard is a colder weapon than hate. You can heal from someone who hates you. But when someone stops seeing you, there's no healing from that. When I woke the next morning, something was different. The air felt hollow, like the house knew what I was about to do. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time, staring at the floor. Then I stood, walked to the closet, and pulled out my old duffel bag. I didn't pack much. Just a few clothes, a second pair of shoes, my late father's watch, and the photo of her from her 10th birthday. She was beaming in that picture. Missing 2 teeth, frosting on her nose. I folded it carefully and slipped it between my wallet and a notebook I hadn't written in for years. I walked past her door. It was closed, as usual. I thought about knocking, about saying goodbye. But the truth is, there was nothing left to say. I walked to the kitchen and placed a sealed envelope on the counter. Inside was every dollar I had left from last month's pay. Enough for groceries, gas, or whatever she needed until the next decision was hers. I signed the envelope simply, Dad. I didn't look back when I opened the door. Didn't glance at the living room where the broken phone still sat, untouched. I stepped out into the morning light and walked down the street like a ghost passing through a town he used to call home. And just like that, I was gone. People say houses hold memories, but I think they hold battles too. Ours did. Every hallway had echoes of arguments whispered behind closed doors. Every photo on the wall wore a strained smile. And by the time my wife left, what was once a home had already started splitting down the middle like a cracked foundation no one dared to fix. We called it a divorce, but truthfully, it had been a long and silent unraveling. There was no shouting in court, no slamming doors. Just months of her eyes looking past me and nights spent sleeping back to back in a bed that once held promises. I was awarded custody because she wanted freedom, and I wanted our daughter to feel grounded. She was 12 when it happened, old enough to notice, too young to process. I thought love and structure would be enough. I didn't know that the damage had already begun to bloom in the quiet. She used to ask questions like, "Why doesn't Mom text me back?" And, "Why don't you smile when I mention her name?" I tried my best to be neutral, to never speak badly of her mother. But even silence has a sound, and children learn how to read between the lines faster than we realize. Those early years after the split were the hardest. I remember burning dinner more often than I care to admit, helping with homework I barely understood, and learning how to braid hair from YouTube tutorials because she missed how her mom used to do it. And for a while, it felt like we were finding our rhythm again. Just the two of us. I was clumsy, overprotective, too tired some nights to even talk, but I showed up. Every morning. Every report card day. Every time she had a nightmare and needed someone to sleep on the floor beside her. But then came the change. It started slowly, missed curfews, slammed doors, eye rolls that cut deeper than any insult. At first, I thought it was teenage angst. That classic father-daughter distance everyone warned me about. But this wasn't just rebellion. It was rejection. A quiet, consistent detachment. The girl who once held my hand crossing the street now acted like I embarrassed her by breathing too loud. And whenever I asked what was wrong, she'd mutter the same line over and over again. You wouldn't get it. And maybe I didn't. Maybe I was so busy keeping the lights on and pretending everything was okay that I missed the cracks growing right under my feet. She started spending more time at her friends' houses. More time texting strangers I couldn't keep track of. I tried being strict, setting rules, curfews, screen time limits. But every rule I made was just another line in a war I didn't want to fight. She resented me. Not because I was cruel, but because I was still here. The parent who stayed is always the one who absorbs the blame. Her mother got to be the vacation. I became the chore. I remember one night, she came home 3 hours late. I was pacing the living room, phone in hand, calling every number I could. When she finally walked in, completely unbothered, I didn't yell. I just asked, "Do you realize how worried I was?" She looked at me, rolled her eyes, and said, "You need to chill. You're not my jailer." And then she walked past me like I didn't even exist. That was the first time I cried after the divorce. Not when my wife left. Not during court. Not during the lonely nights I spent sitting on the porch wondering where it all went wrong. But in that moment, hearing my daughter talk to me like I was a stranger living in her house, I broke. Not loudly, not messily, but in that slow, quiet way a man does when he knows he's losing something he can't fight for anymore. Still, I didn't give up. I tried to reconnect, took her out to her favorite pizza place, tried to talk during car rides, left little notes in her lunchbox like I used to when she was younger. But every gesture was met with silence or mockery. She'd scoff, roll her eyes, and sometimes leave the notes crumpled on the counter. Eventually, I stopped writing them. You can only knock on a closed door for so long before you realize no one's opening it. I even suggested therapy once. She laughed in my face and said, "Maybe you should go. You're the one with issues." And maybe she was right. Maybe I was trying to fix her so I didn't have to face how broken I'd become. I just didn't want to admit that somewhere along the line, we'd stopped being a team and turned into two separate people living under the same roof, tiptoeing around conversations that mattered. And yet, I kept trying. Because that's what fathers do, isn't it? We endure. We swallow our pride. We carry the burden so our children don't have to. But no one tells you what to do when your child stops seeing you as human. When they see you as the villain in their coming-of-age story. When they start speaking to you like you're the inconvenience in their highlight reel. That phone, the one she shattered? I wasn't even checking anything about her that day. I was trying to get her mother's number. I had heard from an old friend that she might be going through something. Health issues, they said. I figured our daughter had a right to know. But she assumed I was invading her privacy. She didn't ask. She didn't give me a chance to explain. She just reacted. Violently. Like I had no right to exist in her world anymore. And maybe I didn't. That night, after she went to her room, I sat in the kitchen staring at the broken pieces of my phone on the table. But what I really saw were the broken pieces of everything we used to be. A father and daughter who once sang along to car radio songs, who used to watch Saturday morning cartoons in our pajamas, now reduced to silence and distance. By the time I went to bed, I had made my decision, not out of anger, not out of spite, but because I finally realized loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. And sometimes, walking away isn't abandoning them. It's choosing to remember who you were before they forgot who you are. I woke up before the sun. The house was still, but not peaceful, just quiet in that unsettling way you feel right before a storm or after a fight. The light creeping through the blinds cast long, pale shadows across my bedroom floor. I sat up, listening. Her door was still closed. No footsteps, no running faucet, no signs of life. Just the hum of the refrigerator in the distance and the faint ache in my chest telling me that this was the morning I'd stop pretending. I stared at the ceiling for a while, not thinking, just existing. That's what the last few years had taught me. How to exist for others, even when I couldn't feel myself anymore. I had spent so long holding the line, making sure the house didn't collapse, that I didn't notice the foundation beneath me had already cracked beyond repair. I wasn't a father anymore. I was a tenant, tolerated only because I paid the bills. I slid out of bed and opened the closet. The air felt heavy, like it knew this was no ordinary morning. My old duffel bag sat on the shelf, dusty and untouched since our last weekend getaway, back when she still smiled in my direction and called me Dad, like it meant something. I pulled it down and unzipped it slowly, the metal teeth hissing in protest, like even it didn't want me to go. I packed light, 3 shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, some socks, my sneakers, my wallet, and ID. I didn't need much. I wasn't running away. I was reclaiming space. I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out the photo, the one of her on her 10th birthday, standing in front of the cake with her hair braided to the side and frosting on her cheek. Her smile in that photo, it could stop time. I used to look at it when the loneliness got too loud. I stared at it now for a long time before sliding it carefully into the front pocket of the bag. She might not remember that version of herself, but I did. And maybe, one day, she'd want to find her again. I went into the bathroom and splashed water on my face. I looked in the mirror, not to admire or judge, just to make sure I was still there. The man staring back was older than I remembered, not just in years, but in wear. In fatigue. His eyes weren't just tired, they were hollowed out, like someone who had been digging for answers in a mind that ran dry. I didn't shave. I didn't fix my hair. There was no one left in that house who cared what I looked like. As I zipped up the bag, I paused. There was one last thing to do. I walked to the drawer by the front door and pulled out a small envelope. I had tucked away a few $100s from last month's paycheck, money I'd been saving for a surprise trip we were never going to take. I wrote her name on the front in the only handwriting she'd ever known as Dad's. I didn't write anything inside. No guilt. No poetry. Just what she needed to live without me. I placed the envelope gently on the kitchen counter. I stood there for a moment, listening. Still no sound. I glanced at her door. It remained shut, like a sealed chapter in a book I was no longer allowed to read. I thought about knocking, about saying goodbye, maybe even waking her up to look her in the eye and ask if there was anything left of the girl who used to fall asleep in my arms. But I didn't. I knew what that would lead to. A confrontation, another storm, a last-minute guilt trip that would bury me in a new kind of regret. And I had enough of those already. So I walked past her door, slow and silent. My footsteps didn't echo. I think even the floor had grown tired of carrying the weight between us. I reached the front door and hesitated with my hand on the knob. I had walked in and out of this house 1,000 times. For groceries. For work. For school runs and birthday balloons. But this exit felt like shedding skin. Like I was leaving behind not just a place, but a version of myself that had finally reached his limit. I turned the knob and stepped outside. The air hit me like a baptism, cool, clean, and different. Birds were just starting their morning chatter. A jogger ran past without glancing my way. The world didn't stop for my pain. It never had. I started walking, one foot in front of the other, toward nowhere in particular. I didn't have a plan, just distance. That was all I needed. Enough distance to breathe again. Enough silence to hear my own thoughts without someone rolling their eyes at them. I didn't take my phone. It was still broken, still shattered on the living room floor where she left it. Let it stay there. Let her see the pieces and wonder if she broke more than just glass that day. Let her sit with the silence. Let her ask the questions I had stopped answering. She would wake up eventually. She'd come into the kitchen, expecting breakfast or maybe a fight, and she'd find an empty hallway, a duffel bag missing, and an envelope with her name on it. No note, no apology. Just the reality of what happens when someone gives everything and then walks away. And maybe, just maybe, that's when she'll realize that breaking a phone doesn't erase the person holding it. It just proves you were never listening to what they carried on the other side of the screen. I didn't look back, not even once. That morning felt like walking out of my own skin, like I had finally unhooked myself from a weight that had been quietly suffocating me for years. I didn't even have a destination in mind, just motion. I walked down streets I'd driven 100 times before, but that day, they felt different. emptier, like the town no longer belonged to me. And in a way, it didn't. Everything I had was tied to a house that stopped feeling like home long ago. The bus station was a mile away. I paid cash and asked for the next bus heading anywhere. The woman behind the counter looked at me like she wanted to ask questions, but didn't. She handed me a ticket to a small town I'd never heard of, 4 hours south. I took it, found the farthest seat from the front, and stared out the window as the engine groaned to life. As the city slipped past me, I felt both relieved and hollow, like a man who had escaped his cage only to realize he'd forgotten how to run. The bus ride was quiet. I didn't speak to anyone, didn't scroll through a phone, didn't check messages. I just sat there, holding on to my bag like it was the only proof I existed. Every bump in the road felt like it was shaking loose some old version of myself, the one who begged to be heard, who sacrificed everything for a thank you that never came. The further I got, the more I breathed, deeply, like I was waking up from a long, painful sleep. When the bus finally stopped, I stepped off into a town I couldn't pronounce, with streets that smelled of coffee and rain. It was nothing special, just another quiet corner of the world. But it was exactly what I needed, unremarkable, unnoticed. I walked until my legs ached, found a cheap motel on the edge of town, and paid for a week in cash. The room was small, the carpet old, and the bed creaked every time I shifted. But it was mine. No arguments. No slamming doors. Just stillness. The manager offered me a temporary maintenance gig, basic repairs, lawn mowing, odd jobs. It didn't pay much, but I wasn't there for money. I just needed a reason to stay moving. So I took it. I cleaned clogged sinks, replaced light bulbs, trimmed hedges that hadn't been touched in months. My hands, once used to typing invoices and signing permission slips, were now calloused and cut. But I welcomed the pain. It reminded me I was real. At night, I'd sit by the window with a cup of instant coffee, watching headlights sweep across the parking lot. Sometimes, I'd pull out the photo of my daughter and trace the outline of her smile with my thumb. I wondered what she was doing, if she'd noticed I was gone yet, if she had even cared. But I refused to call, refused to explain. I had done that too many times, pleaded for understanding from someone who had already stopped listening. The motel room had no clock, no television. I lost track of the days quickly, but there was a peace in the disconnect. I didn't owe anyone anything. For the first time in years, I could sit with my thoughts without walking on eggshells. I didn't have to guess what mood would be waiting for me in the next room. Didn't have to flinch at footsteps in the hallway. The silence here wasn't threatening. It was healing, but healing hurts. There were nights I sat on the edge of the bed, fists clenched, fighting the urge to go back, to convince myself that maybe it wasn't that bad. Maybe I had overreacted. Maybe if I had just been more patient, more understanding, more dad-like, she wouldn't have treated me the way she did. But every time those thoughts crept in, I remembered the look on her face when she shattered that phone. Cold, dismissive. Like she wasn't just breaking glass, she was making a statement. You don't matter. I had mattered. Once. I had mattered enough to stay up through fevers, to work double shifts for school clothes, to skip meals so she could eat something other than cereal. I had mattered when I'd held her after nightmares, when I sat front row at every talent show, even when her voice cracked on stage. I had mattered when she scraped her knee and ran past her mother straight into my arms. But over time, my value was eroded by resentment, teenage rebellion, and the convenient rewriting of memory. People only remember what's useful to them. In this town, I was no longer a disappointment, no longer a punching bag for someone else's anger. Here, I was just the guy who fixed broken things, and ironically, that helped me fix parts of myself too. One night, maybe 3 weeks after I arrived, I got a call from the motel office. Someone had left a message. A girl's voice. No name, just tell him I didn't mean it. Please. My heart dropped. I thanked the clerk, went back to my room, and stared at the ceiling in the dark. That message haunted me not because she missed me, but because I knew that voice too well. That was the same voice that once asked me to promise she'd always come first. The same voice that used to say, "I love you, Daddy," before bed. The same voice that had forgotten how to say anything kind for over a year. And now, after silence and broken glass, she remembered how to ask for me? I didn't call her back. Not yet. I needed her to feel what I had felt. Not out of cruelty, but clarity. I had spent years absorbing her silence, forgiving her tantrums, erasing myself just to keep her whole. Now it was her turn to sit in the stillness, to wonder why the person who never left finally did. If I gave in too soon, she'd never learn. She needed to sit with the echo of her actions. Let it teach her what my words no longer could. The voicemails didn't stop. They came like tides, some full of fury, others full of fear. The first ones were hot with blame. "You think you can just disappear like that?" she hissed. Real mature, Dad. She sounded like a child playing dress-up in grown-up anger, trying to weaponize words without understanding their weight. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, listening with clenched fists and hollow eyes. I didn't cry. Not anymore. That part of me had dried up somewhere between her silence and my sleepless nights. But I felt each word land like gravel against skin, small but sharp. Then the tone shifted. It didn't take long, maybe 4 or 5 voicemails in, before the anger turned shaky. She was trying to hold it together, but her voice cracked in places where it never used to. "I don't know what I did to make you leave," she said in one. "But if it's about the phone, I didn't mean it like that. I was just mad. You always try to control everything," and I just snapped. That word, control, hit differently. That's what she thought I had been doing all along. Controlling. Not providing. Not protecting. But controlling. It was a knife in the gut, hearing her twist years of sacrifices into suffocation. But I didn't erase the message. I saved it. I played it twice. And then I let it go. The ones that followed were quieter. Slower. A girl trying to stitch back something she finally realized was unraveling. "The fridge is making that noise again," she said in one. "I tried to fix it the way you used to, but I made it worse. I think I broke it." Her voice was small. Not defeated. Not angry. Just lost. And I could hear the space behind her words. The silence of a house that used to buzz with my presence. That same silence I had endured for months was now wrapping around her, and for the first time, she had to sit in it. She started calling at night. Maybe that's when the silence was loudest. She'd talk, ramble even, knowing I wasn't going to answer. "I had this dream you were making pancakes in the kitchen," she said once, her voice trembling. "You used to flip them too high on purpose just to make me laugh." I don't know why I remembered that. And for a second, my resolve slipped. My hand hovered over the phone. I wanted to call back, to hear her voice not through recordings but in real time. But I didn't, because I needed her to feel it. All of it. The weight of words unspoken. The cost of treating someone like a placeholder. She needed to experience, not just acknowledge, the absence. That's how empathy is born, not through lectures or scolding, but through consequence. And for the first time, she was living with the consequence of taking someone for granted who would have once given everything just to make her smile. Then came the voicemail that cracked me. "I found your note, the one you left behind the cereal box. You wrote, 'Don't forget to laugh today. You deserve it.' I didn't even know you'd been leaving those." She paused. I heard her exhale. I threw them away. I thought they were stupid. "I'm sorry." Her voice broke completely on the last word. A genuine, unfiltered apology. No defense. No excuses. Just a daughter, finally realizing she'd burned the bridge she never thought she'd have to cross. I sat in the dark after that message for a long time. I didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stared at the ceiling and let the silence hold me. Not the motel silence. The deeper kind. The silence that comes when someone finally gets it. The part of me that wanted revenge, that wanted her to suffer, that part began to let go. Not because I stopped hurting, but because I could finally see the seed of change beginning to root in her voice. The next day, the motel clerk knocked on my door. Said a letter had arrived for me. No return address. Just my name in big, messy handwriting. It was hers. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper. Dad, I don't know how to say what I'm feeling. I was angry at everyone, and you were the only one who stayed. So I took it out on you. I didn't know how to deal with Mom leaving, and then school, and feeling like I wasn't enough for anyone. I broke your phone because I wanted to break something real, something I could control. But I didn't realize you'd leave too. I'm not asking you to come back. I'm just asking if one day we could talk. Just talk. No yelling. No blaming. I miss you. I really do. Love, Ed. I held the letter like it was glass. Fragile. Precious. Full of cracks. But whole. I didn't write her back right away. I still wasn't sure I was ready. But I folded the letter and placed it inside my wallet, right beside the photo of her smiling with frosting on her nose. And that night, for the first time in months, I slept without dreams of walking away. Not because the pain was gone, but because maybe, just maybe, she had finally heard me. I kept her letter close, not in a drawer or pressed between books like some relic from a past life. No, I carried it with me, folded neatly in the same wallet that held her childhood photo. Every time I reached for cash or my ID, I saw it. That page of notebook paper, creased down the middle, written in shaky lines and smudged at the corner. I imagined her hands trembling as she wrote it. Maybe she paused between sentences, trying to find the right words, words that had escaped her for so long. Words I used to pray she'd say. I didn't respond right away. I read it over and over, not out of doubt, but because I didn't want to answer emotionally. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to know that whatever I said next wouldn't undo the progress she made just by writing that letter. I knew how delicate this moment was, how a single wrong sentence could slam shut the door that had just cracked open. Days passed. I worked my shifts, fixed broken faucets, painted room doors. But that letter clung to the inside of my pocket like a heartbeat. It was with me when I smiled at guests, when I wiped sweat from my brow, when I stared at the sunset wondering how a relationship so sacred had become so fractured. And then I sat down to write, not in anger, not in desperation, but in truth. Dear A, you once told me I didn't get it, that I didn't understand. And for a while, I believed you. I thought maybe I was just old, too out of touch to reach you. But now I realize it wasn't about understanding. It was about pain. Yours, mine, ours. You were hurting, and I became your outlet. And maybe I let that happen for too long. Maybe I thought enduring it meant loving you well. Maybe I was wrong for thinking love meant staying silent while you screamed. But I need you to know this. I never stopped loving you. Not when you ignored me. Not when you rolled your eyes or slammed your door or shattered my phone. Not even when I walked away. I didn't leave to punish you. I left because I needed to show both of us that love doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity to keep the peace. It means having the strength to say, this isn't love anymore. This is survival. You're growing up, and growing up is messy. I get that now. And maybe I should have said more instead of holding it in until I broke too. But I'm still here. I never disappeared. I just stopped waiting in the place where I was being erased. If you want to talk, really talk, no defenses, no filters. I'm ready when you are. Not because I need closure, but because you're still my daughter. And even in silence, that will always be true. Love, Dad. I stared at the letter for a long time after I wrote it. My hands trembled a bit, not with fear, but with the gravity of it. This wasn't just a letter. It was a bridge, a final offering of peace. Not a promise to forget, but a willingness to forgive. not a plea to come home, but an invitation to rebuild on new terms, with mutual respect, or not at all. I placed it in an envelope, wrote her name in all caps, and walked 3 blocks to the post office. As I slipped it into the drop box, something strange happened. I didn't feel anxiety or doubt. I felt light, like I had released a burden I'd carried for far too long. For once, the story was no longer tangled in guilt or regret. It was simply honest. Honest enough to move forward, whether together or apart. A week passed before I heard from her. It came as a voicemail shorter than the rest. Her voice wasn't breaking this time. It was clear, steady. I got your letter. I read it 5 times. I cried. Then I read it again. I don't know where to start, but I want to try. If you're willing, maybe we can talk. Just talk. You pick the place. I'll show up. I promise. I didn't respond immediately. I wanted to sit with her words the same way she sat with mine. I let a day pass. Then another. Then I called. She answered before the second ring. Hi, she whispered. Hi, sweetheart. Silence. Then, you called me that again. I never stopped, I said. She sniffled. I'm sorry, Dad. I know, I said, my voice cracking for the first time in weeks. And I'm proud of you for saying it. We didn't talk long. Just agreed to meet at the diner 2 towns over, halfway between where I was and where I used to be. Neutral ground. I didn't expect a tearful reunion or a miracle. I just wanted conversation. Real conversation. The kind that builds, not breaks. The kind we used to have before the world got between us. When I hung up, I sat down on the motel bed and exhaled. Not because the pain was gone, but because, for the first time in what felt like forever, hope had spoken louder than silence. The diner was old. One of those places where the vinyl booths squeaked when you sat. The coffee came in chipped white mugs, and the jukebox hadn't worked in years. It sat on the corner of a quiet highway like it had been forgotten by time. But for me, it felt like neutral ground. A middle place. Not hers. Not mine. Just somewhere that didn't carry memories or pain. I got there early, ordered coffee, and sat facing the entrance. The waitress asked if I was expecting someone. I just nodded and said, my daughter. It was the first time I'd said that word aloud in weeks. She walked in 15 minutes later, hair tied up, hands in her jacket pockets, shoulders stiff like she'd braced herself for a war she didn't want to fight. Her eyes met mine, and I saw it, not guilt, not fear. Vulnerability. The kind that takes real strength to carry into a room. She slid into the booth across from me and tried to smile, but it faltered. Hey, she said, barely above a whisper. Hi, I replied. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was loaded, heavy with all the things we didn't know how to say. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the child she used to be layered beneath the young woman she was becoming. It made my chest ache. I had missed so much already, but I also knew I couldn't rush this moment. Rebuilding had to start from ruins, not from pretending they never existed. She spoke first. I don't know how to talk to you anymore. I nodded slowly. We don't have to get it right today. She looked down at her hands. I was angry, all the time, and I blamed you for stuff that wasn't even yours to carry. I know, I said, and I carried it anyway. That's what dads do. Her eyes welled up. She blinked quickly, trying not to let them fall. I didn't realize how much until you left. I didn't want to leave, I admitted, but I had to. I wasn't helping you by staying in a space where we were both bleeding and pretending we weren't. I didn't mean to break the phone, she said suddenly, eyes locked on mine. I mean, I did, but I didn't think it'd matter that much. It wasn't about the phone, I said. It was what it represented, that you didn't see me anymore, that you thought it was okay to break something that mattered to me without thinking twice. She nodded, slowly. I know now. And just like that, the ice cracked. We talked for hours. Not about everything, Some wounds were still raw, but about enough. About how she'd been bottling up confusion since the divorce. How she felt abandoned by her mother, but didn't know how to say it. How she thought pushing me away would keep her safe from being hurt again. About how silence had become her armor, and I had been the easiest target for her frustration. And I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I let her speak, because I had finally learned that sometimes a father's strength lies in not fixing, but in simply hearing. We didn't end the conversation with hugs and sunshine. No dramatic reconciliation. No magic words. But when we stood to leave, she looked at me differently. Not like the enemy. Not like the burden. But like a man, flawed, real, and still standing despite everything. "Will you come back?" she asked. I paused, then answered truthfully, "Not to that house. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I'll meet you here again. As many times as it takes." She didn't argue. She nodded. That was enough. I walked back to the motel feeling like I had just finished running a marathon in my chest. My body was tired, but my spirit, God, my spirit felt alive again. I didn't know what our future looked like. I didn't know if we'd ever return to the version of us we used to be. But I knew we'd found something better than that. Honesty. I stayed in that little town for a few more weeks. Took more shifts. Ate lemon pie with the old couple across the street. Sometimes, I'd even hum while I worked, tunes I used to sing when she was young, not to remember the past, but to celebrate the man I was becoming. She kept calling. Sometimes, just to check in. Sometimes, to vent about school. And sometimes, she said nothing at all, just silence on the other end while we listened to each other breathe. I didn't need to move back. Because I hadn't vanished to disappear. I had left to be seen again. And now, for the first time in a long time, she was seeing me. Not just as her father, but as a man who stayed gone. So that something better could come back.